and welcome to Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I'm Emily Peck, and I'm here with Elizabeth Spires of the New York Times. Hey, Elizabeth.
Hey, morning.
And in for Felix Salmon is the wonderful Anna Szymanski of Reuters. Hey, Anna.
Hello.
Today on the show, we have an exodus to Bluesky. People have left the platform formerly known as Twitter, now called X, and are migrating to a new place called Bluesky. Is this social media app the new Twitter? Is it just a liberal bubble? We will discuss. Then, a billionaire with very close ties to the leader of a democratic country is under fire. Am I talking about Elon Musk? I am not. We are going to talk about what's happening with Gautam Adani, the Indian tycoon accused by federal prosecutors of fraud. And finally, we are going to talk about the MAGA companies that are trying to capitalize on Trump's win. Will they be successful? Are people going to buy joggers with pockets that let you conceal your weapons? It's a good question. And that's all coming up on Slate Money. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give
it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
So, a few days after the election, I opened the Bluesky app on my phone and found I had, like 1,000 new followers. Something was happening on this social media app that had been kind of dormant. Elizabeth invited me onto Bluesky, I think more than a year ago at this point. But since Donald Trump's election, a lot of people have defected from X, from Twitter, and migrated over to Bluesky. And if you spent any time there recently, it's really giving Twitter 2019 vibes, maybe even Twitter 2012 vibes. There is a feeling of excitement. For me, a Twitter refugee on Bluesky, I'm seeing all these people I forgot existed because everyone stopped tweeting. So it does have a feeling now that there's a community reemerging, reuniting on Bluesky. Elizabeth, since you invited me there in the first place, how are you feeling about this reemergence?
I don't think it's that surprising. I think when Musk brought Twitter, there were a couple of platforms that sort of stepped in thinking that they were going to siphon off some of the Twitter users as Musk kind of eroded the trust and safety regulations that kind of made it usable. But a lot of them had a lot of usability problems. There are a lot of people were on Mastodon, but it takes a little bit of technical knowledge to get onto Mastodon and to sort of understand how it works. Bluesky looks almost like a direct replica of Twitter. It's super intuitive, and they take, the trust and safety stuff seriously. So it's been a more pleasant platform to be on, frankly. And I think in the last few months, X in particular has been swarmed by a lot of bots and right-wing nonsense. And it's become unusable for a lot of people, even if you're not bothered by the politics of it. So Bluesky feels like an almost one-to-one alternative.
Anna, are you on Bluesky?
I'm actually not on Bluesky. I also barely use Twitter. I primarily use it for college football. So I'm clearly probably not the key market for Bluesky. But I think the thing that does concern me, though, is yes, I think everyone agrees that Twitter has become increasingly unusable, and there has definitely been a significant rightward push. But the idea that you're going to create this new model where it seems like it's just going to be a bit of a liberal bubble. And honestly, I imagine that it's primarily going to be journalists who are moving over there. So I fear that you're simply going to have liberal journalists talking to each other, which is fine if that's what you want. I'm just not sure how useful that is.
But I think that's bubble thinking. because most people on social media platforms are not talking about politics or media. I think because we're journalists, we follow other journalists and I work in politics some of the times. I follow a lot of political people, but the average user on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, they're not there for political news or media stuff. Our experience of being on those platforms is very bubbly because of the people, how we build our own timelines. But I think Blue Sky has a lot of utility for people who don't care about politics, like maybe you care about sports or music or something like that. And then, the sort of liberal conservative bubble is less relevant.
Yeah, my concern though is that the people who are moving over are probably not your just average Twitter user. Because as you say, if your average Twitter user does not care that much about politics, they're probably not going to make the move. Maybe I'm wrong. It's entirely possible that this will become an amazing new thing that everyone will move to. But right now, what seems to me to be happening is people who are already very interested in politics are moving over as a political statement.
I think Twitter has really become this sort of, speaking of bubbles, has become a silo for conservatives, for Elon Musk fans, for spam. I think, Anna, that is the downside here is like, is this just a small bubble of media liberals all talking to each other? Still, Blue Sky has momentum right now, but only has 15 million users. I think Twitter's 300 million daily active users or something. Threads, which we haven't mentioned yet, 250 million. So it's small. But one thing I think may be important is Twitter's function pre-Elon Musk was really a source for news. It was almost like a news wire. You could go there when something was happening and find information quickly. But he's really jammed the system up, right? He took away verification from news outlets, from respected and trusted journalists, and gave it to people who just paid for it. So you don't know where the information's coming from. Musk himself spreads disinformation. So it went from being a source of news and sort of that kind of thing to the exact opposite. And now there is this lack of a real-time news outlet, I think, on your phone or on the internet, however you want to put it. You could point to Reuters, I suppose, and say, well, just go to Reuters. But, it's a different real-time aggregation of news. And it seems like Blue Sky maybe has the potential for that. That's a really valuable service to the public to have a source of news getting pulled in from everywhere.
Yeah, one thing I would say, though, is that while I definitely agree that Elon Musk has made Twitter much, much, much worse, it was pretty bad before he bought it, too. I don't think it was an amazing source of news before Elon Musk bought it. Part of the reason Donald Trump became president in 2016 is probably, in fact, partly because of Twitter. So we might be giving him a little bit too much credit. But I think it's an interesting argument, and I do agree with you that I think back in the day, social media in general was often a way that people were creating these kind of aggregated source of news. But I still go back to my original point that, yes, this may serve a purpose in terms of people having a better way to get news without all of the spam. However, they're also going to probably be getting news from a very small number of people who think exactly as they do, which may be fine if you just really want straight news. But I do worry that we're just going to be increasingly moving even further and further into our bubbles.
Another thing I was wondering, the bubbles aren't always bad, right? Twitter, if you go back to its earliest days, was the nexus, the beginning of, or the place where social movements took off and happened and spurred real change in the world, right? Like Arab Spring, for example, the Me Too, another example, just all kinds of like social movements. You could argue part of the reason Elon Musk did buy it was to quash that kind of free speech and that kind of social justice kind of efforts bubbling up. So with like algorithms taking over these spaces, Elon Musk taking over these spaces, there does seem to be a case to be made for a social media space where communities can gather, even if they're all like-minded, just to organize and come together.
I think there are two factors here that are not totally obvious. One is that I think there's a ceiling on reach for any platform that's primarily text-driven. So I just don't, I don't see even Twitter ever getting to the scale that, say, YouTube or TikTok has. So the people who flock to text-driven platforms are, frankly, the people who like to write and read, and people who are, more heavily news-consuming people. So I think sometimes the one-to-one comparisons to, for example, Threads, which is in some sense an outgrowth of Facebook and Instagram audiences, might not be the best comparison. And then the other thing is that In the political work that I do, I have to look at a lot of research around media bubbles and how people consume political news in particular. And there's a pretty big asymmetry between the way conservatives consume news and the way that liberals do. If you're a liberal, you are far more likely to come across a conservative news outlet or article in just the course of your media consumption than you are the reverse if you're fairly hard right. And so as a result, Twitter could end up being more of a bubble than Blue Sky, even if it's much larger, just because of media consumption habits. But again, I think politics is a very small part of why people join these social media platforms. So I'm not sure the ideological bubbles really are going to shape ultimately whether Blue Sky is a success.
Is it possible that this actually can become a success if it continues to be the thing that people like right now? It seems to me that just can't be profitable. So it would almost inevitably have to move more towards a traditional social media, Twitter-like thing. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the problem is not Elon Musk. The problem is just humans, that if you put a lot of humans together and our worst instincts tend to come out. Yes, there are really good things that can happen. And that is the thing with social media. You get the good things, but then you also get people using it to collectively become more and more discriminatory. So I think I'm just a little suspect about the idea that it can both what makes it appealing now and actually become a profitable enterprise.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Dan Primack had a piece in Axios on Friday talking about the initial investment. And there was a $15 million investment in Blue Sky that just happened a couple of months ago, right before the election. That $15 million was meant to last for quite a while. But with the momentum riding so high right now, they're looking to raise like a Series B round. So it seems like that the momentum is fueling more investment. And totally, Anna, who knows where that goes? There's no ads on this platform yet or anything. And Twitter hasn't been very successful, or X, right? He's seen an ad exodus, and it arguably wasn't very successful business even before he bought it. Threads, I think, still doesn't have advertising. So we don't know what comes out of that either. Plus Threads is so weird.
15 million is such a small investment for a social media network, even at the size it's at right now.
Yeah.
When you think about how much time and money went into building Facebook initially or Twitter initially, they've ramped up pretty quickly. And I really think the community moderation stuff is super important. That's part of the reason why, Twitter/X keeps losing advertisers. Elon didn't understand the value of that. And he didn't understand very much about how social networks worked generally, and didn't listen to the people who did. And there was this great piece by Mike Masnick at Tech Dirt right after Musk bought it, called something like How to Speedrun Community Management. And it was addressed to Elon. And it was like, here's what's going to happen. Day one, you get rid of all of these, community guidelines because you want free speech. Here's the first bad thing that happens. So you fix that with this Band-Aid. And then here's what else happens. And he just goes through all of the complications that come with running a social network at scale. And those complications, metastasize as these things get bigger. And, the question is right now, I think Blue Sky is a team of 20 people. Are they going to be able to really handle the scale if they continue to run a platform that so far is fairly, it's not chaotic. It's relatively okay right now. Can they run it stably? Can they raise enough money to scale it? And then, where does it sit in the constellation of all these other platforms that are more image and video driven?
I mean, we'll be watching to find out. When it comes to smart money management, one of the best pieces of advice is to make your money work for you. Well, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide, and you automatically earn cash back on all your purchases. That means there's plenty of opportunities to make that money work. So shop smarter, not harder, basically anywhere you go nationwide. It pays to Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. This episode is brought to you by GiveWell. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to help you do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. All of their research and recommendations is available on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Slate Money at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. Okay, so on to the antics of another billionaire. Earlier this week, federal prosecutors in the U.S., in New York, charged Gautam Idani. He's one of the world's richest people. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud. He was accused and his associates and family members bribing Indian officials and then lying to investors in the U.S. about doing so. It's my understanding he was basically, and I'll ask you to double explain all of this. His firm was basically bribing like local officials in India to sign up for his solar energy company, even though they're charging well above market rates for energy. So the victims of this bribery scandal, as I'm understanding it, are in India. So I guess my question, Anna, is why is the U.S. involved here exactly?
Adani Green, a subsidiary of the Adani Group and another company, received a very, very large contract to provide solar energy. However, energy needed to be paid for by local governments. They didn't want to pay the prices, and in order to, incentivize these local governments to agree to pay these prices, the Adani Group and these subsidiaries allegedly paid bribes. And to be clear, the Adani Group denies all of these allegations. It is an interesting question to say why this is an issue in the US when you're talking about an Indian company related to another Indian company related to giving energy in India. Like, why is this? The main reason is because this company raised money from US investors. And in the documents that they put out when you raise money, you say a lot of things about how you really care about being an ESG company, or you really care about ESG, and you are opposed to bribery. And now, obviously, no company is going to say, by the way, I'm actually bribing officials, just so you know, like they obviously didn't include that in the document.
But they specifically said, like, we are not corrupt, right?
Right. Which literally every company does. That's boilerplate. But this is essentially the way the U.S. can get them, let's be honest. Like, the people who invested money in the U.S., those particular bonds we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, have already been paid back. So they're not exactly the true victims here. I think the real issue is clearly that there was a bribery scandal and the US somehow wanted it to be able to get involved. And so this was the avenue they used to do it.
Well, it is illegal under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act if you are a company that's operating in the US to bribe foreign officials. So if they were not operating here, they hadn't released those statements, maybe they wouldn't be in hot water.
The question about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is interesting. It's like a 1977 law, but in recent years, it's been used more often. And apparently the incoming administration thinks it's been used too much. And it's inhibiting.
Why would that be? Why would the incoming administration have a problem?
The incoming administration, they think that these tough anti-corruption laws make the U.S. less competitive. Anna, I'm going to entertain this question. Do the tough U.S. anti-corruption laws make the U.S. less competitive in some way? Like, is that really an issue?
They probably do. I mean, to be honest, like they probably do. However, if we want financial markets, if we want economies to function, you need to crack down on corruption. That is something, especially if you're talking about emerging economies, it is something that can really, really inhibit growth. So while, it's possibly true that you could argue that, it somewhat hurts the US. I think in the grand scheme of things, though, it's still better for the world if we are cracking down on corruption.
I have another Slate pitch on this. India has terrible, terrible air pollution. I was just on a BBC show recently, and there was someone on there who was based in Delhi, and they were like, I cannot go outside. It's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes just to be here and breathe the air. And a lot of that is coming from factories running on dirty energy. So, hey, if you have to bribe people to use clean energy, is that not for the public good?
Although Adani Group also has coal interest, I think. So they're sort of playing both sides of the table there.
So you're rejecting my argument wholesale. I understand. That's fine.
No, but what I would say, what this is probably going to do, it is going to potentially make it harder for other renewables companies to raise money. Like this could put a specter over the industry, potentially in India, potentially in other places. So I actually think this could have a little bit of a negative impact. I'm not saying it's going to be the major thing, but I do think that this is not good for not only the green energy in India, but globally.
Well, also, I assume the public exposure of corruption makes people, rethink the risk profile of investing in certain areas.
No, totally. And it's interesting, too, because I imagine one of the selling points of these bonds was this idea that even if they weren't ESG bonds, that there was a time when people were more interested in investing in ESG related companies because it was something that clients were also calling for. Now, I think that has rapidly changed in the last few years. And it has changed because clients were not earning the same returns, that interest rates were going up. And so all of a sudden, people cared less and less about ESG. So I think is potentially just one more thing that honestly could make it harder for some of these companies. And that also then raises a tricky situation because we all know that the energy transition needs to happen. And these companies are going to need to raise money. And if they're having a harder time getting it through the private sector, then are they going to have to rely more on government subsidies? The more that happens, the more likely it is you're also going to have corruption as you get people. The only way they can get these subsidies is if they're getting more aligned with government. So I do think we're in a tricky moment.
Yes. And I know I made a joke in the intro, but there are sort of interesting parallels here with Adani, I guess, has a really close relationship with Narendra Modi in India. He's like, basically there's this perception that Adani can do any deal he wants. And, he has like most favored billionaire status in the country. And then you look at a situation like this and you just sort of think like, what's coming down the pike with, the incoming administration?
Yeah. And this is going to lead into a bit of what we're talking about in the next segment about how it's interesting because historically you think of conservatives as not wanting the government to be picking winners and losers, for there to be less of a hand in the market. Mm-hmm. And what we're obviously seeing in India and the rhetoric we're getting out of the incoming administration is the exact opposite of that.
And the United States, one of our biggest strengths is, or has been, or people say it is, the lack of corruption, that we don't have these kinds of they're there and they happen, but less bribery, less corruption. You can rely on the United States as a place to do like a cleaner deal. And Now that looks a little shakier, although the government's going and prosecuting this case. So
yeah, to be fair, we haven't actually seen these changes in the U.S. It's just we're worried that they could happen because of the rhetoric that we're hearing.
Correct.
But last thing I will say that does feed into, the role of Elon Musk, because I know some people have said, oh, well, it may actually be good for EVs because you're going to have Musk there. But the thing is, if you look at like the subsidies that are for EVs, Tesla doesn't need them. It's the other EV companies that need them. Right. So that is an indication of how, this could potentially not be great for EVs overall, and does start to feel a little icky in terms of the relationship between a corporation and the president.
Coda is the collaborative, all-in-one platform that brings teams and tools together. Over 50,000 teams rely on Coda to keep them all on the same page by bringing the best of documents, spreadsheets, and apps into a single platform. It really helps collaboration by centralizing processes and shared knowledge. With Coda, you can stay aligned by managing your planning cycles in one location, set and measure objectives and key results with full visibility across your teams, communicate and collaborate on documents, roadmaps, and tables instantly, enhance, reduce, and replace dozens of apps by consolidating your words, data, and teamwork. Access hundreds of templates and get inspired by others in Coda's gallery. Coda empowers your startup to strategize, plan, and track goals effectively. Take advantage of this limited time offer just for startups. Go to coda.io/slatemoney today and get 6 free months of the team plan. That's coda.io/slatemoney to get started for free and get 6 free months of the team plan. coda.io/slatemoney. When it comes to smart money management, one of the best pieces of advice is to make your money work for you. Well, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide, and you automatically earn cash back on all your purchases. That means there's plenty of opportunities to make that money work. So shop smarter, not harder, basically anywhere you go nationwide. It pays to Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. We are going to talk about anti-woke businesses because the Financial Times had a great story this week that Anna flagged about a bunch of companies that are positioning themselves as anti-woke. Do we need to define what anti-woke means?
It means anything conservatives don't like is woke.
Okay. What is the good faith definition? Is there one?
I mean, that kind of is it because it's a moving target.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably things that tend to have more of a Christian bent, things aligned with the Second Amendment, things that are in opposition to anything ESG, the energy industry, as I said, Second Amendment, so the gun industry.
Yes. Oil and guns. Okay, so here are some of the companies that the FT talked about. There's a company financed by a former Republican senator, Kelly Loeffler, and Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., called Public Square, which is trying to be like an anti-woke Amazon.
As if Amazon is woke to begin with. But
exactly. We'll get into that. But yeah, it's for users who value, quote, life, family, and freedom. And their big source of revenue, someone called it's like a Klarna for guns, shoot now, pay later, basically. They're the company that also sells joggers with pockets to conceal weapons. I don't think you can jog with a gun because it would just like drag your pants down too much.
Seems unwise.
But I don't think joggers are meant for jogging. So it's just more of like a casual, you're going to the supermarket, you need somewhere to stash your gun, you got these cool joggers, etc. So that's one of the businesses. Then there's another one called 1789 Capital that has only one investment, and that's into Tucker Carlson. So do we need anti-woke companies? Elizabeth, I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
No, here's the thing. So I have 2 theories about why these companies are tanking. And the first one has nothing to do with politics. They're just kind of crappy businesses and subpar products that are, inferior versions of things that already exist. So if you look at Rumble, which is their big conservative video platform, although it's not that big, it looks like you tried to buy a YouTube off of Temu. It's inferior in every way. It's less usable. And so a lot of these things are just not good products. And here's the thing. I do think that consumers will buy products that they're politically aligned with if the products are good, but they won't accept an inferior product solely for political reasons.
Well, the other thing is that it's not hard to find conservative content on YouTube. It's not hard to find pants that you could fit a gun in at many, many places.
Oh, really?
I imagine.
Is that true?
This seems to be a solution in search of a problem, which I think is also why these companies are not doing particularly well.
Also, the way that particularly the Christian right will they'll light onto something that's completely innocuous and agnostic and decide that there's, a moral element to it or something like that. And, they'll go back and forth about it. And I'm thinking specifically, I grew up in a Southern Baptist community and my family was Southern Baptist. And there was a yoga studio in my hometown that was called Yoga for Him, and it had a big cross. So it was, yoga for Jesus. And it went out of business pretty quickly because there's the whole Southern Baptist backlash to yoga because people think that it's a different religion that goes against the monotheism that, they believe in. And with stuff like that, it's just not compatible with, frankly, capitalism. You're asking people to make purchasing decisions based solely on, a loose association with a set of political ideologies. It's not even like having a strong brand or something,
Yeah, American consumers, they're buying what they want to buy because they like the stuff. It's not because like I identify as X, so I will shop at Y. It's like, I want a cool pair of joggers, so I'm going to go to this place. Or I want a fleece, and maybe I'll go to Patagonia. And for some people, it's cool that Patagonia is sort of more environmental or liberal or blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, primarily, it's about they want a nice fleece.
Yeah, if I think of one company that actually is successful, that's kind of conservative, super right-wingy, it's Black Rifle Coffee. Basically, it's run by some veterans who are very right-wingy, very 2A oriented, thus Black Rifle. But it's also kind of high-end, gourmet coffee. So, yeah, I would wager that probably half the people who buy it don't even realize what the politics behind it are. It's like they're the kind of people who think The Oath Keepers are a Harry Potter novel. They're just not that into the politics, but they like the coffee.
Yeah, because we're consumers more than we're political actors in this country, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think when you've had companies that have tried to be explicitly on the left but don't have good business models, again, they fail. The idea that people are going to use those products if they're more expensive, no, they're going to use the less expensive product. Because again, people are fundamentally consumers. And what's most interesting to me about this entire story is that it's just reminds us how MAGA is so different from being traditionally conservative. Like for so long, we've thought of the Republican Party as the party of business, as the party of free markets. And this is so opposed to that. And this isn't maybe a new idea, but I think it's just a really strong indication of that. And just the idea that corporate America is seen as connected entirely with being liberal is just such a new and slightly odd thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I wanted to talk about it. And you both brought it up now because Elizabeth earlier was like, wait, Amazon is woke? Like, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, a lot of public companies did go through a period in 2020 where they became socially conscious, around George Floyd's murder. So I think a lot of this is like the backlash to that. That's when the perception grew and exploded. And like, it only took a few months for companies to start like retreating. And now what you see is companies, if anything, becoming less woke or silent on most social justice issues. Like, for example, in 2015, companies did make a really big stink about North Carolina's bathroom bill, which would have prohibited transgender people from using the bathroom that corresponds with the gender they identify as. If you remember, there was like a huge pushback from companies like Salesforce and other businesses, and they got that law scuttled at the time. Well, now fast forward to 2024, there's dozens of these like anti-trans bills similar to that North Carolina one from 2015. Companies haven't said a word about it. It's just a totally new environment. And the thing that these quote unquote anti-woke companies are trying to solve for has kind of already been solved. Like corporate America, if they were ever socially aware, has retreated.
My thesis is that none of these companies changed very much at all. And what they did is, repackage existing diversity initiatives as, officially DEI or whatever. And where they made social statements, I don't think they've really been much more vocal than they have in other periods of big political change. So I just don't see much big structural change at any of these companies, especially if they're of a certain size. I do think that part of the reason why Republicans or Trumpists in particular are baffled that some of their initiatives are not as successful as they would like them to be is because they've told themselves this story for decades that Republicans are better at business or they're better on the economy. And in a lot of respects, they simply aren't. But also, a lot of American culture is manufactured out of liberal institutions. And that drives a lot of consumption. And partly because, and this is another thing where, I think the right, some of their grievances are really projection. They complain a lot about free speech, but the Trumpist movement is very censorious, especially when it comes to things like pop culture. So, if you're going to make movies for, say, the Christian evangelical right, what you can do is very narrow. And so it's harder for them to sort of control the cultural environment when most of what they're interested in doing is narrowing it significantly. And so when you look at people's consumption habits, how many tweens buy things because Taylor Swift made them popular? There just aren't analogs for that on the far right because they're not willing to, cater to a large audience. They want to drive consumption choices by forcing them.
It almost seems to me, too, that when people are referring to a company being woke, what they're often more referring to is the individuals who are most associated with that company. And it is probably true that business leaders today at a lot of major places, frankly, are more liberal than would have been the case in the past.
Yes. I recently wrote about a study that I think that looked at like political donations inside big companies, and they do have a liberal bent. Not at the top, not at the CEO level, but at the C-suite and executive level below, especially. There has been a move left in companies. And that kind of makes sense because we know college-educated people tend to be more liberal right now, more democratic, right? And college-educated people are the ones at the top of these big companies.
Also, we know more about what CEOs think on every topic because of the way media works now. They all get up and tweet. In 40 years ago, you wouldn't have half an idea of what these people's personalities were even like. So, of course, you're going to learn more about their political views.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
Should we move on to the numbers round? Anna, do you have a number? I should just say, Felix is coming back next week, and we are happy to have him back, but we are sad to see you go. So I hope you come back a lot, Anna.
I would love that. It has been really great being here, and I'm sure everyone will be very excited to have Felix back, but I will definitely miss doing this every week. It has been a lot of fun. So my number is based on the fact that since I have moved to London, it has just fascinated me how insanely global this city is. Like, I lived for many, many years in New York, and obviously New York is a global city, but the United States is also a very large place. So a lot of the people I would interact with were just from other states. And here I am constantly meeting, and so many of my friends, people I work with, are from other countries. So I was curious. So I just sat down and I listed the number of different countries that people are from that I have met in a meaningful way in roughly 5 months. And it's 39.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Right. And it's like, every time I'm telling a story to someone, it'll be like the group will have at least 4 different nationalities. And it's frankly really cool. And I think it's something that maybe people in the United States don't entirely understand about other places. And I think especially London, because number one, the countries are just smaller here. So you're going to have people from a lot of different places. But I also think because of the history of the UK and lots of different reasons that there's just an incredible amount of diversity. And it's a little bit of a different type of diversity than where I was in the United States. And it's just been fascinating, honestly.
Elizabeth, what's your number?
My number is 139, and that's dollars. And for $139, you can pre-order a kit off of Kickstarter that will make you a tiny robot that exists solely to put butter on your food. And this, the idea from this comes from Rick and Morty, which is an Adult Swim show where the plot line is about a mad scientist who's very dry and acerbic and is constantly going on adventures with his grandson. And in this episode, the grandson's dad is not that bright, and the grandson has to do a science project. And the dad says, well, traditionally science projects are father and son activities. And then the grandfather, who's the scientist, says, well, scientifically, traditionalists are idiots. And so they start arguing about it. But while they're arguing, the scientist is literally sewing together a tiny robot. And the robot takes a stick of butter, picks it up, rolls it over to the pancakes, and drops it on the pancakes. And then it looks up at its creator and says, what is my purpose? And Rick, the scientist, says, to pass the butter. And so the robot kind of turns around, goes back, passes some more butter, looks at him again and says, what is my purpose? And Rick says, to pass the butter. And the robot looks despairingly at its arms and says, oh my God, And so this has become a meme around existential futility that has been on the internet for like 6 years. And this is why this robot exists now. But it's actually a cute STEM toy, if you have a kid who's into robotics, because it will respond to voices. It has a kind of magic 8-ball feature that will give you advice. There's a little camera and the remote, so you can send it around to play with your pets and stuff like that. But I just thought the idea was great.
Wait, so it passes the butter? Does it spread the butter?
It does not spread the butter. It just has two mechanical arms that kind of pick up, and not a pat of butter. It picks up a whole stick of butter and smacks it on your pancakes.
Because that's what you want. I love that. My number is $587,800. $587,800. That is the minimum salary that Gen Z considers makes you financially successful. So that's over $500,000 of salary per year. This is from a survey from Empower. They do these kinds of surveys where they ask, like, how much money do you need to be happy? Da, 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 da. This one was, what income do you need to consider yourself financially successful? Boomers said $100,000. Millennials said $180,000. Gen X, $212,000. Gen Z, again, over $500,000.
What do people who work in media say? What's that number? We're all like, it was 75.
I just got an email today that was like, the reason the media didn't see the Harris loss coming is because they thought the economy was good because they're all rich, all the journalists. And I was like, I don't think that's true. So I don't know what's up with this number, why Gen Z has so much of a higher standard. I think if you want to take it seriously, because maybe they were trolling in the survey and they were, said some wild number, but maybe this is realistic because these people are young and there is inflation. They've just lived through this like insane inflation. And I bet you in 30 years, that will be the minimum amount of money you need to be considered successful.
I blame internet influencers.
I was just going to say that.
When kids who are like 9 or 10 go on TikTok and they see all these influencers who are showing like all these luxury goods that they're buying and they're like bragging about how much money they make. And then, kids my son's age, who's 9, develops this idea that, first of all, anybody can do this. And second of all, that this is a reasonable amount of money for somebody to make for doing selfie videos on TikTok all the time.
Yeah, I guess. But boomers think it's just, it wasn't even $100,000 for boomers. It was $99,900. They're like, what? You need $1, get you a Coke and a candy bar, and you have change left over to see a film? Like, they just don't know how much things cost either.
In their 20s and 30s, it meant something to say you had a 6-figure salary. Like yes. that sounded like an just insane amount of money in 1988 if you were 32.
Yeah.
I do think boomers do still buy things. to be fair.
They do.
Fine.
I've seen them.
My number could have been $6.5 million, which was the price paid for a piece of artwork that is a banana taped to a wall. But we are leaving that for next week and for Felix Salmon to tackle. That's it for our show today. If you have thoughts, comments, want to tell us how much money you need to be considered successful, better ideas for AntiWoke businesses, thoughts about banana art, send them to slatemoney@slate.com. If you're a Plus member, the fun doesn't need to end. You can find a special extra segment in your feed. We are going to talk about if we really need to clean. Maybe this is the solution to everyone's problems, is just stop cleaning your house. That's in your feed somewhere else. You can go look for it right now. Thanks to Cheyna, Roth, and Jessamine Molli for producing. I'm Emily Peck, and on behalf of Anna Szymanski and Elizabeth Spires, thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here next week on Slate Money.